Sometimes one of our quick tips will stimulate a question for another one. This time, one of our quick tips stimulated a question for two others. So let's do a twofer. The quick tip that stimulated this one is quick tip 231. It was about value for depth, how we use both value gradation and value contrast to create depth. And I used this photo of this scene for that quick tip, so I decided since the quick tip, since the questions referred to that one, I'll use the same photo to give it some continuity. So what were the questions asked? One was, could I do a tutorial similar to the one 231, but use warm and cool colors as I gradate? That was one question. And then the other one was a combined, let's see this tip combined with the atmosphere effect of objects as they move further into distance. Well, so we can combine those two, but it's not a good idea just to combine something theoretically. It's okay to learn theory, but theory is really no good unless it applies to something that you're going to do, or applies to reality, or in some way increases your skills. So let's base what we do on what we observe. That's always the better way to go about it. So I chose here a photograph. Now this has atmospheric gradation of images, or gradation of values as images move into the distance. It's a little bit on the extreme because we do have fog here in the atmosphere, which is causing that. So it's a little bit of an extreme of what the person asked for, but we can learn something from it. So let's observe what is actually happening right here. Now we'll notice that one thing that happens, and I can just put this color wheel up right here for a moment to sort of emphasize that. One thing that happens is that the hues in these colors, well, this picture doesn't really show the hues very strongly as hues, but if you watch what happens to those hues, they lose some of their hues. They become a little bit more neutral as they move in distance. That part of that's caused by the fog, but we can also see that happening in a more subtle atmospheric situation as images move in the distance. So that's one thing that you can take note of. So what happens here, the way we do that, is that we will use complementary colors in order to create a more neutral, just a little bit more neutral. Now, the other thing that happens, if you'll notice in this one, is that the values, the contrast of the values decreases. It's not just that the values get lighter. They do. The value groups, this group of value right here, and compared to this right in here, it gradually gets lighter and then even gets lighter here. But something else happens. It doesn't just get lighter, the contrast decreases. So you don't have as much value contrast here as you have here, and you don't have as much value contrast here as you have here, and so on. So one thing that you can look for, as exampled right here, if you're looking for images decreasing in whatever they decrease in as they move into distance, they're going to decrease in value contrast. Now quick tip 231 addressed that somewhat, but I want to apply it to what we're seeing right here. We don't see a great distance here and we don't have any fog. So we can take the situation here and apply it to this. Now that is a good exercise for you, to take from one scene characteristics that that scene has, and then use a scene that doesn't have those characteristics to sort of translate what you're trying to do. So I'm not going to do the whole thing, as I never do, but I'm going to do just a brief little demonstration here to show you how that works. Now the part two of that question, or the first question, was wanting to see this with warm moving to cool, or with the temperatures gradated. So what I've chosen to the colors I've chosen here to show you this little demonstration are complementary colors, and that's what you start out with if you have warm going into cool. It's a good idea to just start out with complementary colors because that is what happens as something gets cooler. It will, as a color hue, as a hue gradually gets cooler, it often gets cooler by its complement. And we could use a complement that has some of the we could use a color that has some of the complement in it, or we could use the complement itself. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm just going to use two color sets here. Now this is a sort of an orange. We might call it a lower intensity orange. This is the Transparent Oxide Red by Rembrandt. Kind of a low intensity orange, leans a little bit more towards red than it does towards yellow. And then I have here the ultramarine blue, and I have, of course, 3 values here. Usually I'll set a value line that goes from the darkest dark to the lightest light I see, but I chose just to use the 3 values here. Now, let's do a little something. First of all, that shows what we would see in terms of gradation, and we see a little bit of that here, darker to slightly lighter as it moves into the distance. And we see in the background trees that really move into the distance, we see the contrast change. Now, I demonstrated that for you in 231. So now let's just take just this bunch. We're not going to mess with this stuff down here, but I'm just going to take just this bunch of trees and show you what we might do. Before I do that, I'm going to slightly dampen that canvas just a little bit. This time, rather than to, there's a quick tip on this also. Rather than to spray directly, I'm just put a little bit of a combination of Gamsol and poppy oil on this gauze, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of a dampening. The surface is dry, and I need that surface to be slightly dampened so that so the paint will go on more smoothly. That's an oil paint, and you would do that probably with water if you're working in acrylic. That's just a little bit of side thing there. It's not necessarily related to your quick tip. Okay, now that we've got that, all right, let's get a little bit here, a little bit of placement just to kind of see where this thing's going to go, to sort of show you where I'm working. So I'm looking at the trees that are moving in the distance. Now these trees are not moving in the distance. These are relatively up close. These are further away from these, but they're not as far away as background trees. So we need to switch our attention from the whole thing to just that area of trees that are moving. They're pretty much grouped together and they're moving sort of in the distance there. So just to kind of place that, I'll just sort of roughly place that on the canvas, and you see as they move in the distance, of course, they get shorter, and then over here gets very, very short. And then we will see that the bottom parts of those trees will move in the distance at, well, with eye level we have here, our eye level is about right here, so we see the bottom parts of that group of trees is slightly tilted upward. So I'll just sort of do that and kind of look at what's happening there. Now we get pretty much an okay placement for that. All right, warm to cool. Now I'm seeing neutrals. I'm seeing these very neutral. And this is a warm scene. The camera has photographed it warm, and the printer has printed it warm. My memory of it wasn't quite that warm, but we can sort of take a little bit of artistic license here, and we can start here now with a value of these areas back here, a value that's in the shadow value range, which is a darker value. And so I'll start out with the warm right in here. This is the middle value warm, but I need that a little bit darker. As you can see, it needs to be a little bit darker, so we'll just bring it over and create a darker version of that right here. Now we need to neutralize that even more, even though we can see here, even though the transparent oxide red is a slightly neutralized hue, it needs to be neutralized a little bit more. So we'll just pull a little bit of the ultramarine blue into that and get it more neutral. You can see that happening on the palette. Transparent oxide red is a high tinting or higher tinting strength than ultramarine blue. There is a quick tip on tinting strength if you need help on that. So I'm just adding enough ultramarine blue into that, and I'm adding it from both these piles because it's darker than this and lighter than this. So now let's see what we have here. That is closer. You can see on my brush that's closer, and so and I'm looking at that background group of trees, so I might begin a block in that goes something like this. It's relatively warmer, as you can see, and of course it gets dark as it comes to the bottom, and so let's just pull a little bit more dark into that. It's a value issue, a temperature issue, and a neutrality or intensity issue. So we can get that moving a little bit darker as it comes towards the bottom. And of course I'm not going to do the whole thing. I won't bring it all the way out, but just to sort of show the principle here of reading, and translating. Reading the hue, reading the value, reading the intensity or saturation of the hue, and then take what we read and translate it onto canvas. That's reading and translating. So I don't think enough emphasis is placed in our teaching of painting. I'm not sure that enough emphasis is placed on our training our eyes to actually read color in terms of what color actually is and what it's doing. All right, so now I'm going to take this out. And as I take this out, see, it's a little bit darker at the bottom all the way as it goes out. As I take that out, I'm going to begin to make it a little bit cooler. And how I do that, add gradually as I go. This is gradation of intensity and gradation of value. So I will gradually, as I move into this, you see that's a little bit cooler. So I'll gradually make that a little cooler and a little lighter. All right, so now I've got to move over into the lighter version of both those colors, but I want it to be cooler as it moves into the distance as well as lighter. Cooler means adding more blue. Lighter means adding a lighter version. In this case, it's white mixed with blue and the transparent oxide red. All right, now watch. So I can begin at any point right in here. It needs to be a little bit lighter and cooler. So I begin right here, make it a little lighter. There we go. A little lighter and a little cooler. Gradually get it cooler. Now, how cool do I want it? Well, I can check right in here. That's almost neutral. So it doesn't go totally cool here. It goes cooler. And that is also what the person who asked the question asked for. We get a little bit more of a better gradation in here. So cooler, this is cool enough probably. So now we need to stick with that degree of cool and just make it lighter as it goes in the distance. Now here, this is the value. This is the degree of lightness. That's pretty much the value that we need to register. So I just need to keep that cool and keep it on that same value as it moves into distance. All right, now keep that, don't need to get that too light. Let's see. All right. There you see a slight gradation. Now I have that gradating enough. Let me get just a little bit more, come back in here and get this gradating a little bit more in here. Cool, warm to cool, darker to lighter. And I can even get it lighter and go up into my white and be sure that's cool. You see what you're doing with the brush and the paint, you're controlling these things by what you pick up. So here I'm controlling value by the picking up the lighter colors. I'm controlling temperature by whether I pick up warm or cool. And so the hue's pretty much established. The hue, in fact, sort of disappears there. But since our concentration is more on the value and the in the temperature. Let's get that even cooler there. So then if we're looking at this as our as what we're striving for, then we end up with, in the tops of these things, we end up with something sort of like this. And then it gradually gets a little warmer. Now we go back into the warm. So and then not only warmer, but a little bit darker. So it gradually gets warmer. Gradually means you don't see where one value ends and the other begins. And value gradation, that's what value means, value gradation means. All right, so now we're increasing the value now. We're increasing the dark, increasing the dark now, and we're getting it warmer as we come forward. So gradually warmer. And this is just a block in for what we're seeing behind all that. So it's just a good way to get started if you're doing something like that. So gradually, and then let's see, as we come forward here, the value gets darker and warmer the closer it gets to us, to where we, the viewer, is located. We, the viewers, are located. Now, one thing that you'll notice when you're working with oil and acrylic is when you're working with getting a dark lighter, it's more difficult, it's trickier, I should say, to get a dark lighter than it is to get a light darker. So we sort of have to do a little bit of maneuvering there, because I'm coming backwards here. Yes, I could pick up here and move forward with that, but I want to show you that you can work it backwards as well. And we always have some variation in there. It's not just solid. So we'll have some variation in both the value and the temperature, because there are other things going on there that we're not really observing. All right, so I'm going to, let's get some paper towel on here. I'm going to pull that paint out of the brush now, so I get a little bit more control going in here for the darker, the warmer, the darker, and here of the blue, because I don't want it totally the same degree of warmth that transparent oxide red, as it comes out of the tube, has. Let's get just a little bit lighter here. Now let's see what we got. There we go. So we can begin to emphasize the dark of the value. Now as we're coming forward in here, begin to kind of emphasize the dark of the value right in there. And then let it begin to gradate as it moves in this way. Add just a little bit of the cool from the middle value pile here, and let it gradate into lighter and cooler. So that is roughly a technique that you can use. It's not a it's not a formula by any means. It's a principle. It's a technique that you can use to translate images as they move into distance, and how the atmosphere affects them. Now, the atmosphere, the particles in the atmosphere might be they might be thick, or they might be thin, or they might be almost not there, or feeling like, because on a really, really clear day, especially right after a rain, you're going to see images clearer as they move in the distance. But what causes images to get less distinct and lose their hue as they move in the distance is the atmospheric particles that are within those images. Now, that's what you would do to the background. As far as the images in front are concerned, look at Quick Tip 231 and you'll see how I managed to do that. So the only other thing I would add here to that is to remind you that this is not a solid value, not a solid smooth gradation. That what we see as we move this into distance are variations, and we see variations in value, a little bit of variation in value, a little bit of variation in temperature even here, and we'll see the same thing in here, a little variation in value and a little variation in temperature. Now, if you're interested in taking this further into how to paint fog, we have a quick tip, and I can't remember the number of it right now, but you can search for the quick tip on fog and find that. So I think maybe that takes care of both questions. Give that a try, practice it, and see if you can make it work for you. Be sure to view all of our quick tips. And while you're doing so, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell, so you'll always get a notice when we produce a new quick tip, which is every week. And if you have a question, leave it in the comments section and we'll make a quick tip for you. Also, take a trip over to DianeMize.com where I have full-length lessons, downloads, DVDs, lots of other stuff there, some free stuff for you. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll always be informed every time we do something new.